Okay, it's 1 o'clock. I'm calling the meeting of the Finance Committee, Finance and Planning Committee to order. We do have a quorum today. So with that, let's just go, well, okay. Carl? There's a stack of stuff. Okay, so everybody should just have a little stack of paper. It's a little tricky, it's two-sided, so I hope you can navigate that. It's called to order, gonna read the disclaimer. Official recordings, videos, or transcriptions of HSVPOA committee meetings and or board meetings will be done by authorized personnel only and can be viewed on the HSVPOA YouTube channel and Explore Village. Any other recording, video, transcription of HSVPOA committee meetings and their board meetings is not considered the official record of the HSV Property Owners Association committee meetings and or board meetings. That's a disclaimer. First item on the agenda, review of previous meeting minutes. In the spirit of just-in-time delivery, Kathy has distributed the meeting minutes
Hey,
from...
there was 5 minutes leeway.
Okay, yeah, well, I mean, it was a short week. And normally we have 2 weeks, so. I did make 2 comments on it. First was the day said Monday should have been Wednesday. And the second was in terms of collateralization, and it's in your email engine. It suggested adding one sentence that said, essentially, due to collateralization, the we agreed that the 1.0 million of line of credit, letter of credit, should not be in operating reserves. I think that is what we agreed to. Those are the only 2 suggested changes to the minutes.
Does
I
that-
assume
Does that?
no one
cover-
else
Say
had,
that again,
what? The,
because I thought it was, we were waiting for Karina to come back with information regarding that
okay,
line of
if we
credit.
want to say that, then
Yeah.
I think
I could be
Kathy's,
wrong.
Well, that's what
Maybe.
it, I think it
That's-
says that.
Yeah.
isn't it?
I think it says
Okay.
that. So,
And-
so we do not put in the suggested wording.
Yeah, because
Okay.
it could go either way,
Okay,
depending on the outcome.
fine.
And Becky had an input too. I read it, but I thought, to me, it says that, so I was gonna get wording if you had something further.
Yeah, it says operating reserve.
Yeah, and there was, I think you brought it up, I piled on, there was some discussion about the amount of money that we had into the reserves. And so that kind of went back and forth, bounced around about, you know, what is in there, how much should it be? And so we had some discussion on the actual amount in the operating reserve target funding.
Whether it was sufficient or not, whether 2.5 is enough money based on Karina's comments, so that's
Yeah.
probably not equal to 1 month's worth of
And
coverage.
I went a little bit further, saying I questioned whether just making the other ones dependent on the depreciation from the prior year was sufficient, as depreciation is one of those things that kind of bounces around on you. It's not a stable number. And so we had a little bit of discussion on the targets or what is the basis for the funding in the 3 reserve accounts.
Well, I think, and maybe I'm wrong there, that the minutes said that Carl and Becky were to have a discussion,
Yeah.
kind of summarize all that stuff, and then we just got to get back to it. I mean, we
Yeah.
can't resolve that today.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think, from what I read of the minutes, and I agreed that this did occur, that you 2 are gonna really zoom in on those issues. Hopefully stick it in writing, we can all look at it, because I think we just all have to go back and this, the operating reserve issue, the emergency reserve issues, is on today's agenda. I think we want to try to approve, right now, we're just trying to approve the minutes, not address the issues themselves.
So
Do you
I
want
can't
me
make a
to-
motion, but I would say it's open for motion as corrected per your suggestions,
Well, just so far, one correction, which is the date.
but I can't make that motion.
Oh, that's true. So if there are no other discussions about the minutes, and I don't hear any, is that right? No more comments about the minutes? May I hear a motion?
I motion to approve the minutes with the correction
Right.
as noted.
Yeah, the Wednesday, Monday, Wednesday, right.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, passed. Today's agenda. Everybody has a copy of the agenda? Any comments?
Just one technicality.
Sure.
It's actually update on line of credit, letter credit's a different animal,
Okay,
just for clarification.
okay. With that, any other comments on the agenda? Motion to approve?
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so passed. Karina just said she needed to leave about 10 minutes to 2. With that, I think we have to discuss
Budget.
the budget. So instead of item 2, I'm moving that to item 1. In your little package of stuff, on the third page, it actually says page 1 at the bottom. It says Public Utilities Preliminary Review. This is a copy of the latest thing that I had originally sent out. Jeff commented, and I made a few more comments. But I think today, we're not here to discuss public utilities, but more your global and high-level assumptions going into the budget. So with that, I have no intention on going past the first page. So I think we just want to skip down to where it says global budget issues for Karina, hope to discuss Monday. So the first issue is broadly, what is budgeting approach to salaries? We usually have a macro salary increase assumptions, and is there anything that we're going to do different because of this concern about filling open
So
positions?
just to fill you guys in on that side of it, police and fire are being handled a little bit differently. They're gonna have a little bit more of an increase than the rest of the organization, due to the difficulties that we have there. Across the rest of the board, we are looking at, and this is not a done deal yet, but a 3% cost of living and a 1.5% merit for a total of 4.5%.
Okay. So you're saying that the 3% COLA is like everybody, or just
Yes.
broad swaths? But
Everyone.
it's a broad increase, not targeted to anything in particular.
Correct. So
then-
overall, you're looking at a 4.5% increase. 1.5% is where there's a little bit of play depending on specific situations.
Okay. Last year, health insurance was a big issue, just what's happening.
It's not anticipated to go up. We're not gonna have final numbers until October, but our preliminary meeting last month, I believe it was, we're not gonna see an increase. We
Okay,
could possibly see a small decrease, but to be honest, I would feel more comfortable leaving it at a stagnant amount, because you usually have a flow in that anyways. And it's all based upon claims that get filed and everything else.
well, generally, we're self-insured, is that correct?
Yes.
Except we have a layer of excess insurance.
Yes.
Once it
It-
crosses a certain level,
Yes.
then the,
Then it'll kick in and they'll
Yeah.
cover the excess and above that.
Okay.
So our claims have been low for the last couple of years, but typically you're gonna end up seeing a high spike at some point. So I'd feel better leaving it where it's at right now.
okay, but when we look at the budget numbers, are we looking at just your best guess as to the self-insurance part? Or is it mixed in, or is there a separate number for the excess insurance part?
It's not in excess, it's a grand
Oh.
total, it's a cost per head, and so that's how it will be factored.
Okay, all right, I see, okay. Just generally, what are electricity rates doing? 'Cause
Well,
it's a big number in lots of places, so.
we're up a lot from last year. That is primarily due to the fact that we have more buildings open. We had restaurants closed last year, you had the front fitness center closed last year. So this morning I looked, and from August of 2020, for electricity overall, we're up 101,000. But when you compare it to 2019, year-to-date, we're only up 8,000. So I would say, depending on usage, other than that, we're pretty stagnant.
So the rates themselves aren't doing anything exciting, it's just how we are.
And I think there was a rate increase that took effect the end of 19, but we haven't really hit it because of our usage has dropped. So eventually, yeah, if we get back to full capacity, that might end up impacting us a little bit. And we're checking on exactly how much that was.
Okay. New houses, what are we using for 21 and 22?
So for 21, we're using 150 as our estimation.
For this year?
Or, I'm sorry, for 22.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
For 21, we used 125.
Okay.
And that does get applied across assessments, it gets applied across the utilities, as far as new home builds and so forth.
Okay. This is what I call a budget 2 issue. So this has nothing to do with the base budget, but we're supposed to do a second layer. I assume for public utilities, they're not being allocated anything for a presumed assessment increase.
I would assume not.
Okay.
It is the rest of the organization that is failing as far as that goes, and public utilities, as of 2021, is done paying back the
Right.
POA. So they're gonna have more funds available to them, which is also why you see their capital has increased some. They have a little bit more flexibility with that. All that being said, with what you have in here, we are adding the buy-in fee schedule, or the buy-in fee to the fee schedule per discussions that have taken place. So that'll be for both versions. And that's not in the fee schedule you guys looked at.
Okay. So the thing that it kind of puzzles me is, for the buy-in fee, was there any thought to allocating it, some to operating, some to capital, or is it all going to capital, or is it all going to operating? I mean, any thoughts there?
Well, I think what it'll end up doing is helping fund the areas that we are low, which we know we're gonna be focusing on the infrastructure needs. So whether it gets prioritized through an allocation directly to that, or that's just where you see the increase in expense, we haven't covered yet, but
Okay. So it sounds to me like the process really is kind of needs-based as opposed to rules-based.
for the buy-in fee,
Yeah, for the buy-in fee. I mean,
Well-
you said you're looking for kind of the places that
Mm-hmm.
need the funding the most.
which you're gonna see, I mean, you should see an increase in your culverts and
Right.
stuff, which is the streets expense, which is not covered by utility, so it'd still be there, so we haven't dug into an allocation part or any of that. We haven't got that far yet, all I'm trying to
Okay.
say is we're adding it to the fee schedule and we're building it into the budget,
Right,
both versions.
okay.
Just a question or an interjection, isn't that the memo that's under preparation and discussion with the board? Yeah, the policy.
Okay.
So, which would kind of direct some of that, wouldn't it?
Well, is that for the
Well-
buy-in fee or the assessment increase itself?
I thought it was,
Policy is for additional revenue,
Just additional revenue, period?
period.
Okay.
Okay,
I think
So-
we're being too cute by trying to say the buy-in fee does this and the assessment does this. It's all general revenue, period. How we spend our general revenue has to be prioritized in accordance with this policy that we'll see probably next week.
You see, I hadn't seen it, so I didn't know.
yeah.
I didn't know what all it was
Well,
covering.
I think we're all waiting for it. Okay, so that will answer a lot of questions when we get it. Okay.
And there's a lot of debate, and there will be a lot of debate about how that's worded, so.
Yeah, I can see that and I sympathize with it. And, look forward to it. Okay, so any questions about kind of your global macro budget kind of assumptions? I mean, that's my list.
Well, I've got some of the
Okay.
answers for some of your other stuff.
Yeah,
Not
we're-
everything, but can I spout them off to you?
Sure.
All right, so under your general public utilities question, you asked if the fee increase was 5.8 for water and sewer. The answer is yes. And that's what's on the fee schedule. I believe the comments in both sections reflected that. Then you'd asked about the internal billing for rolling stock and buildings. And yes, it's in the respective department for the budget. Everything over 1 year out is in the originating department, because they still have to be the ones to execute that. So you will see it being spread out as we go into each year. Let's see.
Well, before, okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Okay. When we look at the 2022 budget, for rolling stock, there is a line there that says essentially maintenance. So that's money being allocated, that's expenses being allocated from auto maintenance to,
So the expense side is already built into all of their budgets, okay? Because that's being allocated.
right,
The part that stays in the originating department is the capital pieces,
yeah. Okay,
along with the AC replacements, because we don't know how that's gonna go. So it's in
okay.
PW 60, and as those are incurred, then we are reclassing that expense to the correct
Okay,
department.
I mean, in terms of what I was looking at, the numbers that I was looking at, essentially are operating expenses, not equipment, essentially equipment.
Okay,
All right,
then yes, they're already spread.
okay.
Is there a mechanism by which that cross-referencing is being tracked? That's the one thing that I cannot follow the bouncing ball on. I understand the concept, but if we put it in fleet for a new vehicle, but then in execution year, that cost is in the actual receiving organization, how do you, what's the tracking reference mechanism? There should be some kind of number or something that we could follow the bouncing ball, and I can't find it, so can you help us?
Yeah, so in 2021, the 7-year O&M, which is what you originally are looking at. So in 2021, nothing would have been in fleet. It would have already been allocated.
Right.
So then in 2022, it'll be allocated. And so what you should end up seeing, and what they've already been doing, because they're already updating the 7-year O&M as we're going through this, it says assigned to department. In that same field, instead of having the dollar amount, they're putting assigned to a department, and you can see that it's going to the respective one. Does that answer what you're looking for?
Yes, I guess. Until you see the 21, there's no way to reference it. But once you see, I'm sorry, until you see the 2022, you don't know where the reference is.
Correct.
Okay, I got me. Okay, I can go backwards.
Although, I mean, for all intents and purposes, you've already answered this question, but when I'm looking at specifically public utilities, they are essentially, quote, billing out water and sewer to other departments.
Yes.
So if we had a rolled up budget, you can see numbers coming out of here, out of public utilities, and going into restaurants or golf or.
Are you talking about the water bill? These are two different things that we're referring to.
Not the water bill, but the budget. Because when I look at public utilities, there's a line way at the bottom, and it's red, and it's income.
Correct.
So-
That has to do with all the utility billing.
Right, that's still, to me, it's internal billing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it hits that allocation account, and then it is reflected as an expense on the other side. So it's the reimbursement to the public utilities.
Right.
The capital stuff is a different animal.
Yeah, I wasn't talking about, I was
Okay.
still stuck on, yeah, and it's kind of confusing because they kind of really are the operating budget and the capital budget. It gets confusing. And this is just a sidelight. The billing between water and sewer is huge. The sewer uses a lot of water. And so there's a big transfer from water to sewer, or vice versa. And when you roll it all up, it just disappears. Yeah.
She was going down the rest.
Yeah, you were, going.
And I'm gonna skip around because I don't have
Sure.
you
Yeah.
answers on everything. As far as why Public Utilities has more in their budget compared to last year, as I said, they're supposed to be done paying back the POA, that's an extra $500,000 that they have available to expense, plus the increase in fees gives them a little bit more as well. I'm gonna skip on down to your items where you're asking about the capital. The utility boring machine. It's because they have gone back and forth of what would be required to get this done. And Jason's purview is that it's gonna be a much cheaper machine that they would actually need in order to do these jobs in-house. Right now, they use a contractor. That was his reasoning for pushing it to current, because it would pay for itself much faster instead of hiring the contractor, especially if we got it at this lower cost. The clarifier, the amount has gone up just due to price increasing. Then your questions as far as how would it move the 85% capacity number and so forth in the 3 different phases. The response I got was, it doesn't lower it, it just helps handle the problem. And then you are looking at, do you put all the money into the wastewater plant, or do you put it all into the collections inflow system?
Right.
One is trying to deal with the problem, one is part of the problem. So it's part of juggling that there. I'm gonna go ahead and skip on down to our national conferences required. No, some of the conferences that they put in there are not required, but they haven't been attending anything for several years, and they want to try to start getting back on top of their training. So that's what some of that was. They're supposed to go in and give me a list of what conferences they're actually wanting to attend.
I guess my question was, there's a big difference between a conference and training.
Yes.
Most conferences, you don't get training. So I just wanted to clarify, are we getting training, or is there specific classes being held or something like that? Or are they just going to the National Water Treatment Plant Conference and they hear 5 speakers and come home? Okay, great. I don't know if there's
Right.
a lot of value-added training in that compared to other
And-
things.
and
Unless
there's-
there's a return on investment.
Yeah, and they're supposed to be getting, like I said, more clarification of what that consists of. I'm gonna skip on down to your specific issues for public utilities and water. You're asking about the residential water billing trend. And I'm gonna just go ahead and answer this for all your questions that are related like that. With the water billing. They've never accrued it in the past except for at year end. This is the first year that I've accrued it on a monthly basis, okay? So the formula that you see in the budget spreadsheet is a simple 7 months divided, or the cost divided by 7 months times 12. So I have not gone back in and manually adjusted where all of those need to be, because we'll actually end up picking up part of the January billing in December. So it will increase, so your forecast will actually be higher.
So, I mean, what I was looking at is the trend looked like that, but once you make your adjustments, the trend will look.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
So like I said, that kind of comes down into some of your other questions with the wastewater. Electricity dropping expenses over time. That is because we have just recently moved the pump houses to PU 40, so they're not under the wastewater plant. They're actually under the department that does all of the pump houses. So just trying to realign our expenses with where they go. So overall, you're not gonna see a net change. It's
Right, I
just
mean, if you-
departmental,
If you could aggregate the right lines, it'll just,
yes.
okay.
Then as far as all the rest of the electrical stuff, I'm still reviewing and I hadn't got into all that.
Okay. We kind of said we wouldn't do this, but, so this is just me, and I'm kind of asking the committee. You've seen the list of questions that basically Jeff and I have come up with. I would say if we had done this last Wednesday, we couldn't have done it. But this is me. If today Jason were here, I think we'd be prepared to ask a lot of questions. These are good. We don't have anything specific for Wednesday. We don't have anything specific for Monday. Does the committee feel that we can now talk to Jason just about public utilities? Because I think that was the idea last Wednesday.
I thought we were holding off.
Well, that's the question. Because this is a
Doesn't
lot,
change.
this is a lot of stuff. And I think when we get to other units, it's also gonna be a lot of stuff. And, you know, there's one question about, do we think as a committee that would be beneficial? But the other thing is your side, which is, you know, you still may be working on a lot of their stuff. So,
My understanding was we were gonna wait until
Okay.
they completed that, and then we would go through all those.
okay.
And
So
we would add on meetings, starting on after the 22nd, and just
Okay.
pile through them all.
Okay,
It,
That
it
was my
seems like it would make sense to some degree, because some of these questions, not a lot, but some, are like they're just a shift of expenses to another department, and, but the net effect is nil or none, so.
Right.
We're burning energy reading through some of this when it's easily answered at the end of the day. But it's just my thought on that.
okay. So we're sticking with the original plan that says we wait for essentially the big bang.
Yep.
Okay. I think the other view was, do we want, I mean, are you able to forward to us additional budgets like the public utilities? And if so, is this committee interested in, you know, essentially doing prep work? Or again, we just wait for the 22nd?
Well, I
There-
thought,
there are two
I thought
questions.
the last meeting, we decided that as Corina had something that was relatively final, she'd send it to us and say, hey, here's the big holes, but this
Yeah.
is where we're at. And that we could
Right.
dig into that as much or as little as we wanted to as committee members. I like your idea of kind of getting thoughts together ahead of time, but I think when we get to the end and it's a complete package, I would think a lot of these are the kind of questions that the people who prepared the budgets are just going to be able to click through with us. I don't see a lot of things here that look to me like they're going to require a lot of research, but that's just my view.
So I think when we last met, you said the golf and recreation were
We've gone,
imminent.
we've gone through with golf. I have not met with recreation yet.
Okay. So you.
I don't have a problem forwarding them all along.
Mhm.
I don't have a problem waiting.
Okay.
The only thing I would, you do as you wish. It just, from my point of view, don't get lost in all the weeds.
Right.
Stay at a high level view, because that's where all your important stuff is. So as they're saying, a lot of these questions, it may end up being no question at all. So you may spend a little more time than is necessary, but whatever y'all want. I have no problem forwarding them along as I get them
Okay,
reviewed halfway at least.
okay, very good.
I'll
Again,
point out that there may be a bit of another issue. Does one take more of your time than the other, or is it pretty much equal?
Public utilities is the largest one to battle.
But in terms of sending them out piecemeal versus waiting for the whole roll-up?
Well, the thing is, with sending them out piecemeal, I still have to do the whole roll-up to know if I'm still gonna have to cut $1.5 million or whatever, so that your whole picture can change.
Which, to me, indicates let's wait till the 22nd, but.
Yeah. Can you, if you do send anything, can you send them in Excel?
Yes.
Okay.
you mentioned that public utilities is probably the toughest, and it probably is. I think streets, et cetera, that's also gonna be, it's
I'm sorry, Public Works.
public, okay, public.
Public Services.
Public,
So-
that's Jason.
So Jason.
Jason, yes.
Umbrella
Okay, I
is
agree.
the largest.
Is there, I mean, I'm not too worried about lakes and buildings and stuff like that. And fleet is just like all capital. But anyway, it's really the streets and common property that there's a lot of activity. Where in that, where do you view that?
I've already met with them. They're doing some of the cleanup on their stuff, and I'll go ahead and forward that one now.
Okay, that's the one that, the golf is of course one that's big. And then I think the rest of Jason's area, that's also gonna be big. I mean, I would appreciate that, those being the highest priority. Get it out to us, as Carl said, Excel is wonderful. And I don't have anything more to say about the budget.
I just got one real question, I guess, for Karina, and maybe just a comment, but, so I think it would be very helpful, and I assume you guys are doing this, that there's some kind of reconciliation from the budget forecast that we did 22 to 27, so we'd be talking about 22, and what actually gets budgeted.
You're talking about specifically capital budget.
Well, capital, but then there's also operating things like, dredging and all those kinds of things. So
Well,
it's
there-
not
there's- yeah.
all in capital.
Right,
It's-
correct.
But if there is a change to what we did in the spring, then I would hope there's rationale versus us asking the question, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We can pull teeth, or we can just
So-
be straightforward and say, we changed this for this rationale, and then that clears it all up without us having to go through it like I did and go, well, that was a medium last time, and now you're calling it high, but no answer why. So if you don't send a why, I'm gonna ask the question every time until we get to, hey,
And
be
I'm-
proactive and already know that that question's coming, because otherwise, we don't have a way to
Absolutely.
reconcile what's changing, why it's changing, and do we all agree that that's,
So-
the best approach?
So what
going
they've
forward?
all been asked to do is on all their capital items, which I only made it, last week I only made it through the first department of
Yeah.
doing it. But it's going and finding that particular line item on the 7-year O&M, what was the comment, what was the class, what year did it fall in? And justification for why. So I'm requesting all of them to go and give me the line item, or the actual row that it is on in the 7-year O&M, and the comments, and the justification of why did it change from medium to high? Why did your amount change? What is your methodology? What did you put off in order to move this medium over? All of that will be,
Okay,
So far,
Right.
I've seen a few more comments on the proposed, I'll get it out, budget compared to last year. So I think that's an excellent trend, and otherwise Jeff's question can't be answered. So I would really pound on that idea.
yeah.
Comments, so you don't have to keep going back and looking at the same thing over and over again. You've got better things to do.
Yeah,
So-
they all have to justify exactly why it's on there, where it was, why the change.
okay.
So, I mean, just to clarify what Jeff said, there's going to be stuff in 21 that isn't going to be executed in 21. So in terms of the reconciliation, the stuff showing up in 22, some of that is holdover.
We're moving away from holdovers, right?
Well, the holdover budget versus actually buying a hunk of equipment.
We'll re-budget.
Yes,
We will re-budget if there's something that was critical that we did not get to execute.
Right, that's
but, I mean,
that
sometimes,
should be a fading memory. Anything called rollover, it should be
yeah.
past tense.
The only thing that's rollover that you guys are referring to that will continue is if you actually have a work in progress, if you have a capital project started,
Yeah,
you're gonna have the rollover there.
But when I look at the 22 capital request, I'm assuming, but I would bet money, that what's showing up in 22 used to be in 21. We just didn't spend the money to, for whatever reason, to buy it in 21. So when we look at 21 in terms of reconciliation, it should include stuff that was.
It will have added items that if it wasn't able to be
Right.
executed.
The
yes.
second item is, there are things in 22 that is going to be pushed off into 23.
Absolutely.
Okay.
There's no way we can obtain everything that's in that
Right, right,
7-year
right,
O&M for
right. But,
22.
in terms of tagging them, I think that's what Jeff is.
There shouldn't be anything in your 22 column as of right now for the O&M budget that you guys already reviewed from the 2021 budget, because they didn't know that they weren't going to be able to execute it at that point.
Mhm.
So it would be an addition now for 2022.
Okay.
Then there will be comments.
Yes.
Okay, very good.
For purposes of our October 6th budget review,
Mhm.
is it just on budget 1, or will there be something related to budget 2 on that?
I assume,
I'm
we will
assuming budget
comment
1
on,
only, but.
I assume we'll be commenting on both budgets, but that's probably something we're going to,
I'm getting budget 1 done. My goal is to have it done by the end of this week, very beginning of next week. Budget 2 is gonna be exactly the same with a few modifications to payroll and capital, so it should be fairly easy to execute. So my intention is to give you guys the completed version 1, and 99% sure, as long as I'm still kicking, I'll be able to give you version 2 at the same time. There may be 1 or 2 tweaks,
Sure.
but
Okay. That
my
was
goal
where
is
I
to
was
have
at.
both. That way you guys can see hey, here's what we get now, here's what we could possibly get, but then it also helps with the fact of we're identifying where those funds are gonna go. So if the assessment was to pass, they know it's going here, here, and here.
okay.
Do you have something different, Gary?
I do not have a crystal ball. I can tell you that, well, I can only speak for one board member, but I can tell you, I don't know how to answer that. And
Do you
I don't know how
expect to see
anybody,
both?
and I quite frankly don't know how anyone can right now. We just have to be prepared. And if you can't prepare one way, you prepare another way. I'm talking about sources and so forth. And I'm not in a real good position to say what will change, but something will change
Yes.
if what we need isn't brought forward.
Yes.
So more than that, is almost anybody's guess.
You could still end up with a version 3, in other words, possibly.
I hope not.
There are a lot of ways to get there.
So I was gonna say, yeah, that makes sense. So if it doesn't go through, budget 1 needs to be altered,
Right.
probably.
But
Well, budget 1 is without. Budget 2 is if they vote yes. Then we will tweak whatever we gotta tweak at that point.
That's kind of what you're saying, to put in language I can understand.
and you can add the board to that statement, I guess. Whatever needs to be done. But quite frankly, if I said anything, I'd be out of place.
I think what they're really trying to say is that even though we'll prepare budget 1, the board may choose to take other action also,
Okay.
okay, to address funding shortfalls, which will change budget 1.
Yes, that's
Okay.
where budget 3 would come in.
That would be budget 3. Okay?
Okay. I don't have anything else. Does anybody else has anything to say about what we know about the budget today, or looking into our crystal ball, what we think we need to do to prepare ourselves better for the 22nd? Then no one has any further comments. We'll just go on to the next item.
I kind of have one question, just,
Okay.
it's probably not the appropriate time, I'm good at that. Have they redone the fees for, say, golf and non-resident fees at all?
No.
And not really a plan to?
Not at this exact moment.
Okay, is it still on the agenda a bit, or? when they go through the fee structure. I look at it from a sales marketing standpoint primarily, so that's my concern.
With version 1 and version 2, no.
Okay.
Version 3, who knows?
Okay.
You're talking about the pricing.
Yeah,
Probably need to ask John Paul.
we.
Well, we
asked
talked
at the
about it last
meeting
week, and we were unaware that that was something that we needed to be trying to push forward. So as far as I know, especially right at this moment, we're not pushing forward with that.
Okay.
Now, something could change.
Some of us like the idea.
You know, you guys probably need to talk about it, I would think.
Yeah, just tell me what to
Provide some
do.
directions.
I like the idea of putting it on their back. Thank you.
Okay. That's sort of a lead into the next topic, which is finalize the fees memo, which is the first thing after the agenda. The goal in the next 10 minutes is that we all agree, yes, this is the memo we will send to Karina. Just go straight to the substance. This was a recent change. Measuring and monitoring, an overarching comment is that the monitoring of results is critical in evaluating the impact of decisions and evaluating success of programs. Okay with that? Administration, most of these things are just, we've hashed over, talked about the membership fee. The next line item is something that was, again, the last minute change, and it is dead on point with what Kathy just said. Consider differentiated fees between improved and unimproved property owners. The suggestion is for relatively small increases such as $1 for golf and 50 cents for other activities. There may be a variety of areas where this can be implemented. Everything else, I think, is pretty much the same as prior memos. The RV park was changed slightly to say instead of PO, NPO, property owner and non-property owner. And for streetlight fees, there was a deletion of a, just leftover comment that shouldn't have been in there because of other changes. Otherwise, there's nothing in there that isn't something that we should have already reviewed.
Now, the only thing I would like to add to that is in reviewing the streetlight fee. Year to date, we're running 167,000 for our utility costs in public, or in streets, which is the department that covers those billings. Other than that, they just have the one building that they are in, so that is very minimal. So that is the cost that is, we're incurring for the streetlights. 167,000 year to date, and year to date we have brought in 200,000. So in reviewing that and talking with Jason, we are fine with not increasing that. There's not justification to increase that light fee. So we're going to leave that stagnant.
Okay. I would just as soon leave the comment in there, but if you want to take it out, that's fine too. But, I'm 50-50 on either one. The people, just because I'm lazy, I would leave it in, but.
I just leave it in and then.
Okay, and they've already
we've already done it.
Right, yeah. Aren't we great reviewers? With that, unless there's any comments, I'm going to ask for a motion to approve this memo.
Can I add 2 more comments? I apologize.
Oh, sure.
It was brought to my attention, it was on the screen when we reviewed it, but the handout that I had sent apparently was missing it. There was, I believe, a $3 return. It was a sanitation fee, $3 a time, and it was to come back and pick up their trash. So if you didn't get it out in time, and then you call back and say, hey, my trash is full and it was missed on the route, would you come back and pick it up? There was a fee added for that. I'll send it out on the revised schedule, but it was on there, but I don't think anybody mentioned it, so I just want to make sure that you guys are okay with that. It kind of just helps cover the cost of having to go back out to the
It's-
And we
residents.
still have the dumpsters right there on Menorca or whatever
Yes.
that road is, right? So people could take it themselves.
Yes.
And $3 doesn't seem like enough, but I understand.
Is that just for same-day pickup when they're still in the area? Because they don't do it, somebody's supposed to be a Tuesday and they ask you to pick it up Thursday. They
No,
don't.
this is just like if you missed your route that morning and that situation. And then the other thing that was brought to my attention, because the police department had the animal control under their purview.
Right.
And now that that is switching to compliance, I was told, and if you guys look at the fees, for picking up a pet, there used to be a 1, 2, and 3 fee, and apparently there's only a 3 fee now, so they were asking about being able to institute the 1 and 2 back. They said police had eliminated that several years ago because they didn't want to mess with it. So I still need to get feedback of what that proposed fee would be, but is that something that you guys would be in agreement with? So it's the first time pickup, second time pickup. There is a third time pickup that is still there.
Do you remember how much of a difference there was?
That's why I said, I need to go find out exactly how much. Or are you guys just on the playing field of don't charge first and second time? Think about it.
Personally, I'm fine with listening to any proposal. Generally speaking, I find many proposals to be totally reasonable. It's really what you guys in operations feel is necessary.
Yeah, do you know
Do you guys
why
have
animal
much?
control wants to do it in 3 steps?
Well, I think it was the fact that they just didn't want to, and I could be speaking out the wrong side of my mouth here, okay? I wasn't I wasn't
Yeah.
involved in them. The fee used to be there and it was eliminated. I'm assuming, and we all know what that means, that from my understanding, it was removed just so that they didn't have to deal with it, didn't have to turn around and bill the customer and property owner and so forth for it. But there are fees that are, we do incur costs of going out and trying to find the animal and pick it up and so forth. So that's why they're wanting to bring it back.
So I ask a question that you probably don't know the answer to, but then the question that I would logically ask would be okay, so how many times are we going out picking up animals on the first and the second time? If it's not very many, then why are we charging a fee? It's more work than it's worth.
How would you have it? So my understanding was you've picked it up the first time, then you've picked it up the second time. It's the third time you've picked it up that they're actually charging the fee.
Right, so the question would be how many times is animal control going up the first time to pick up pets right now? Is it a lot? Is it every now and then?
I'd have to look at the revenue of what the third one brings in, because it'd have to get through 1 and 2 to get to 3.
Right. Well,
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to kind of the theme that we're kind of building momentum on, which is how often do these things happen? Yeah.
That's-
And how
that's
much
what I'm
revenue are
asking.
we?
How often is animal control having to go out and search for a dog?
And what is the cost of doing it and the cost of charging a fee? Because it costs you to charge a fee.
Yeah. It costs us to send a person out to
That-
drive around.
that's my
and all that
question.
kind of stuff. So
What is the
there's just
cost?
metrics to try and help us understand whether it makes sense. And then there's the other part of, okay, it happens the first time, things happen, right? So do we really
Yeah.
need to be charging people for the first time that it happens? Maybe not. That's not necessarily good public relations.
Right. Well, and that's why
Now, if it happens
I
a
said,
second time, and a third time, now you're starting to build a trend with
Well, and this is
picture
listening.
fence.
so I mean,
This
the
is-
third time may be the only thing that should be applicable. That's why I was saying, regardless of how much it is this something that, and it was just brought to my attention, so I haven't had time to look into it.
Yeah,
And they do get a reclaim fee when they claim the animal, do they not? Don't they have to pay to get it out of?
Well, that
So
kind
to speak?
of, I think it's a partnership between Animal Control and the Animal Welfare League,
Okay,
which is where they're actually housed, so I'd have to know more information as far as.
yeah, because I'm thinking more from the welfare league, because they do have, this is anecdotal and beer talk, but there is a number of repeat offenses. And I think Larry has a saying for you, get what you reward or don't get what you deter.
Yeah.
And it depends on the metrics, but I'm kind of in favor of charging a fee because it's not that difficult to contain your pet if you're responsible,
Well,
but.
maybe the second time, yeah.
Yeah.
We all get, my dog goes running off every time the door opens, so.
I don't think we're gonna resolve that issue
Yeah.
today. There's probably a million issues like that. So going back to the issuance of this particular memo, are there things that we feel have to be in here or have to be removed? If not, I would then look for a motion to approve.
I motion to approve the memo as written and provide it to Karina as soon as possible.
Provided the what?
And provide it to Karina as soon as possible.
Oh, yes. Right here, a second.
I'll second that.
Favor?
Aye.
Aye, okay. Nay? Motion passes. At that point, Karina, thank you very much. As always, we totally appreciate your time. The next item on the agenda is Carl Bezois. We talked about that a little bit already, but it's just, and Karina did give us an update, well, before you get out the door, 10 seconds, maybe 20. Any update on the line of credit?
She's got an answer for me. I've emailed her for the phone call because we have a few other things to cover, so I hope I'll have an answer for you guys today.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. With that, just generally, where are we, what are the issues? How do we move this forward, stuff like that.
In general, I have been collaborating with Becky
Mhm.
on a couple of changes. I think it really comes down to the information we get from Karina to actually finalize it. Having said that, we did a lot of our collaborating today, so we haven't sent it out, but we will send out, I can send out an updated version, if you will. I think there was just some, let's see if I can talk, and you can jump in whenever you want, Becky, because I might misstate something. There were some questions. I'm going to skip around, but there is the one section in there, it's in section 3, at the bottom of section 3, that talked about the 2014 water plant. And the question was, it's not part of the policy, so why include? I think, in general, we beat that question around a little bit and decided to leave it in because it was more of a historical thing. And we were just trying to keep different versions in there to not necessarily lose track of that.
Was it, and I'm likely wrong, but I thought earlier we had decided that that would be moved kind of to the end, as in a part of the revision history or historical history, maybe not, but I thought I remember typing that.
It can be, we could probably move that down there. What, do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, there was some conversation about how do you accommodate historical changes and stuff like that. I don't know what the resolution of that was. But it was
It may have
just,
been why it was left in. I know the section 3, where we talked about the different funding levels, we
Yeah.
would kind of incorporate a version history in that, but
yeah. The only thing, and I'd have to read the exact wording, but the only
Carl, that's from
reason
your
I
last one
wanted
you sent
to
me.
keep that in
Yes.
there was the kind of the payoff line was public utilities has finished paying off their $500,000 to $1 million a year. That's 2021 paid $1 million, or 2020 paid $1 million, they're done. No more payback to the general fund. That to me was the most important part of that historical ordinance. If nobody cared whether they should or shouldn't continue to pay the $500,000, then theoretically you can get rid of it.
My only thought on it is that it at least captures that history. If you delete it from there, you know, people can bring it up and just create problems. From my perspective, it just clarifies that that's been completed, and now this is our new starting point.
So yeah, its presence serves a purpose. Exactly how to say it, you know, the exact content, I don't have a strong opinion.
Can I also just make one other point? I think it is important history, right? Because it's how we depleted our reserves before.
Right.
Which wasn't an emergency, okay?
It may have been.
Well, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't.
I think it was
but-
required by the state, and we went, dang. That was, and I don't know how many people in this room actually can speak to that. I wasn't part of that decision. I was here, but I was unaware of what was happening. So, but yeah.
That would have been the classic bond issue.
That have been observed at other times.
I mean, versus deplete your reserves, that would have been the classic
Right.
bond issuance
Mhm.
if you get a declaration. That's
Right,
my
yeah.
perspective,
Yeah.
but
No, I agree with you, but that's water under the bridge. So, but that is kind of, I think we're in the same place, which is mentioning that is not gratuitous.
yeah.
So anyway,
I'll move on to the next point, which was about, it was brought up last meeting, of who is delegated to manage the policy. And it was suggested the GM rather than controller.
What section are you
I'm sorry, I
referencing?
am jumping around, but that is section 2. Any thoughts on that? I mean, it can be delegated to the GM, but he's gonna delegate it to Karina anyway.
Well, section 7 talks about the general manager working with the controller and staff will identify reasons for accessing the emergency reserves.
Right.
So I don't know why we wouldn't put general manager as the primary person responsible in the earlier section, but
Well, I can tell you why I brought it up. It's a reporting structure and it's a responsibility thing. The controller is not responsible to the board. The ultimate control, the ultimate responsibility goes back to the general manager who reports to the board. And to me, it was clarifying the reporting structure, the responsibility structure, because the controller is in an awkward spot. She reports to the general manager. She doesn't report to the board. And yet, in this document, with that line, you are now making her assume a responsibility that I believe is really the responsibility of her boss to delegate to her, not for her to assume it initially, which is why I brought it up.
well, I think that's what I just said, was that
Yeah.
I thought it made sense to have the general
Right.
manager be the person
Yeah.
responsible. I agree with what you're
Yeah.
saying.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And, you know, right up front, there it is.
I say we change it to general manager.
Yeah, done.
Okay, done.
Okay. See if I can, you have a version in front of you, right? You all have, looking at the latest version? Okay. In section 2, we talk about definitions and goals of each of the reserves, utility reserves, general reserves, operating reserves. The last sentence of each one, it was worded as the minimum funding levels are designated by the board of directors from time to time as detailed in section 3. Section 3 is just, it listed the target, where we were, and that kind of stuff. The comment was that the policy in section 3 sets the funding amounts by approving the policy, the board has designated the minimum amounts. Thought it was, maybe not appropriate for that definition. My take on it is that the targets were set 3 years ago, and then from time to time, the board should look at it and designate new amounts potentially. And I think that's just why the statement was in there. Kind of puts a little bit of onus on the board to do that. Do you have any concerns about that last sentence? Should it be in there? Should it be reworded? Should we do something else?
So my only thought is, I think it should be in there, but then in section 3, at least in the version I'm looking at, I'm not seeing where it tells me that the board should review it annually, should do something, should spend a little bit of time thinking about it every now and then to see whether those numbers are the right thing. It doesn't say that.
Yeah, not in section 3, in section 4.
Yeah.
There's a paragraph that says, at least biannually, the board, in conjunction with general manager and controller, will review and set new targets.
Okay.
And you're thinking a change to which?
I guess I would just say section 3 and 4.
Section 3 and 4.
Yeah, so if you just go to paragraph, or section 2, which is what we're talking about, in the last sentence of each of the sub-paragraphs, it says, the minimum funding levels are designated by the board of directors from time to time as detailed in section 3, that's the number, and then if you put section 4, that's the annual review. Now you've tied it all together.
Okay.
Just to make sure that, I can't say my command of the English language is all that good. Biannual means every 6 months.
Biennial to me is every 2 years.
Can we just say at least every 2 years?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have to admit, I'm the one who brought it up, or admit, I have to state, I'm the one who brought this up because I'm hard-nosed on this. And Carl and I have had a little bit of discussion back and forth on my being hard-nosed. Do you need the policy? Do we need to have a reserve fund? Well, if we have to have a reserve fund, I say we have to have a reserve fund. And if you have to have the reserve fund, I see it as being fairly defined and restrictive. You set up a fund, you don't say kind of wishy-washy, well, we don't have the money this year, so we're not going to do it. Or we don't have the money this year, so we're going to do things differently with it. I'm very hard-nosed on this, and I have been for years, not only here with this, but where I come from, and even in my own personal life. I do the equivalent of this type of thing in my personal budget, and I'm hard-nosed. And it's set up that there is a need for a fund to accomplish this, and there is going to be that money in there. And that money needs to be there. It needs to be funded when it falls short. My concern with the depreciation is it goes up and down. I'm very hard-nosed on this, thinking if there is a need for us to have it, there is a need that we are going to have to adhere to and fix it hard and fast and adhere to it hard and fast. And so that's my take on this type of fund or a capital fund is if you believe there's a need, you need to make sure that that need is there and is met, and that you don't fall short and somebody says, and I think some of you may have seen in the past, sorry, we don't have money this year, so we're not going to fund it. And so that's why I put this in, and some of the stuff Carl and I have been going back and forth on this a little bit, because of my hard-nosed attitude.
The only thing I would say is, to me, you're blending two different funds. You're blending the working capital fund, which they just recently created, which is to fund projects. And if we're short, then we can make sure they're not gonna be short, so we can get stuff done. And that's reoccurring work and done all the time in order to manage our cash flow problems in a more efficient and effective way to get stuff done. Versus the emergency fund, which is this policy, which is specific to, holy crap, something happens and we have to deal with it, like the tornado that came through a while back and stuff like that, where now you don't have a choice, you're stuck in this emergency situation. It's like an emergency reserve account in your own personal budget, you don't touch it, it's for when stuff fails on you that you weren't anticipating. If you are anticipating it, you're using this money over here in your working fund to pay for those kinds of things.
It's to cover the unknown.
Right.
You know, a dam breach or.
And since the board has set up both funds, we're only talking about one set of funds. We still haven't started working on the policy for the working capital funds, which is what I hear you say.
I obviously then am not communicating,
Okay?
because I'm taking the opposite stance. Here is this fund. You do not play around with this fund. You fund it, you keep it funded, period.
Yeah.
You don't go back and say, oh, we're going to review it and treat it like some other thing that we can go in and we can change. We are either going to put the money in there and it's not going to be touched, it is going to be adequately funded, probably with an increasing amount of funding, because, you know, things happen.
Well, I think that's why we were saying you need to review it every couple of years, because cost of doing things goes up, so the amount that you have, kind of like what we had with Karina about saying, hey, we said 2.5 was enough as an emergency fund for operating, and now she says it's 3. Okay, so that, once you know the new number, then you gotta set the board needs to set the new number, and then we gotta fund it back up.
I think where we're kind of losing it is, I'm assuming a minimum, and you can only increase it. You can't decrease how much you put into this fund.
I think he's saying the same thing.
Yeah, and I thought that's what the policy said. These are minimum numbers.
There are places where I don't believe so. To me, if you set a target isn't establishing a minimum. To me.
On Section 2, it says these are the minimum
Yeah,
numbers.
yeah, and I think maybe we go back into the board, we'll review it to see if the minimum is increased.
I think just maybe in section 3, which is probably a lot of what you're talking about, we just need to add the word minimum in there, and it's not in there.
You'll see that I did that
Yeah.
on what I sent you. And so that's where I'm coming from. I want to make sure that this fund is there. People don't play around with it, and people know that they have to fund it. It has to be funded.
I think,
Section 4 says targeted minimum
Yeah.
funded level.
Yeah.
I think.
I don't like the word targeted to begin with, because
Usually
I
targeted,
kind
it
of go
wouldn't matter.
back to my mother-in-law, well, I'll try.
Yeah,
It will be. It's not I will try.
yeah.
I'm not aware that this committee has ever had any position other than what I hear you say, whether the document itself does a great job at expressing that. I mean, and to a lot of degree, you know, we tend to update our policies or whatever based on the old wording and aren't really keenly aware of the subtleties and nuances of the existing wording and aren't quite good enough at adapting to, you know, here's what we really, really want to say. Because we're not writing this from scratch, we're just, you know, redlining the heck out of it. But like I
We're
said,
probably
I
right
don't-
now dealing with semantics, and I want to make sure
Yeah.
that somebody else doesn't come through and play with semantics with it.
Right. And I agree with you, and I think from a intent standpoint, I haven't heard you say anything pretty much exactly what I was thinking, and we just have to learn to express it accurately in the document. Because like I said, I know when I drafted the first draft, I just took the old policy and just started redlining it. But I think I believe we're on the same page.
So that's what Carl and I have been going back and forth with.
Uh-huh.
I think maybe one last thing. In section 3, underneath the chart, we make the comment, reserve contributions shall be deposited at a minimum annually into the accounts. Put in there, at the direction of the board. Suggestion was to remove that sentence because once the board approves the policy, funding it should be automatic. And I wasn't sure if that was correct and wanted to get other feedback, meaning it's not necessarily an automatic. There's no amount set in the policy to reserve. We have a 5-year target that they're trying, or at least this one, as it is written, came from a 5-year target, where they said it should be, I'm still rounding numbers, but the utility should be $2 million, but it doesn't say it's got to be funded $400,000 every year. The board looks at it, reviews it, and says, okay, let's fund it with $600,000 this year. It might be $300,000 the next year.
I kind of like the idea of having, we were talking about biannually versus annually or whatever. I kind of like the idea of having the board look at this annually and give direction to the management to do the funding annually, because I think if you leave it to happen automatically, it may or may not. But if you put this in front of the board once a year and say, hey, here's where we are, here's where we need to be, direct the management to do the funding, to me, that makes sense. And it shouldn't take a whole ton of time once the policy is set. But,
I like
Back in.
what Ford says. And I think that the board, it doesn't hurt for the board to take a look at this all the time, every year.
It should be part of the budgeting process.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, one other thing I brought up, I don't know whether you saw it, Carl, because it's a really small thing. Shortfalls. Scares me to let it drop down to 10%. Where it says, if any of the funds has been less than 10% of the minimum targeted value for 2 consecutive years. I think you can't wait till it gets down to 10%. I think that number should be much higher percentage.
Did that come
Where
out?
are
I
you?
think
What?
maybe it's misworded. I think it meant if it got down to 10% less than no, maybe not. I'm sorry.
You
It's in
probably-
section 6,
Section 6, first sentence.
reserve shortfalls.
You may mean it was less than 90% of target. That's
Yeah,
what
that's-
I would feel much better
That's
with
what
that.
I'm kind of thinking. Don't know how to word it, but
you just change it from 10 to 90.
Change it to 10.
that sounds good to me.
That's more aggressive than what I put down, but I like aggressive.
Well, or, 90 or 80 or whatever we think the right number is. But
Yeah. I like that.
And then one last thing that I talked about the last time, it came from my experience. Hopefully you learned something from your experience, but under the last section, I proposed adding a line that says, item 6. And, yeah, it's redundant, but to me, I wanted to be forceful about it. Something along the lines of asset and any of the funds may only be used for the purpose of that fund. It shall not be withdrawn, borrowed against, or transferred to any other fund. I think it's in there, but that is me beating somebody on the head that we're serious about this. You're not gonna play with it.
I didn't have a problem with
I
that.
don't have a problem with that.
That's fine.
No.
Because I've seen that happen.
Yeah.
Can we go back to section 6?
It's like-
It may be time of day or whatever, but the last sentence, well, that sentence says,
One long sentence.
minimum targeted fund level over prescribed number of years. For some reason, prescribed jumps out at me. What does that mean?
I think the context is, you gotta come up with a plan that may be over a couple of years and
Yeah, okay, so the board adopts an operational budget sufficient to fund the emergency reserves
over,
over a planned period. Okay, gotcha, yeah.
You may not be able to do it in a single year.
yeah. I'll just change it to a plan, over plan number of years.
And I'm still bothered, I don't know how to get around it without further talk, bringing in somebody like Karina, that I would like to have the basis for the first two funds, the reserves and the general reserves, a little more strongly, positively defined, other than 1 year's depreciation. Because I've seen the needs go up while the depreciation goes down, and you get a little bit of an offset that goes against this philosophy I've got in my head.
My thought on that was the 2016 or 17 thought was it was gonna be based on the 1 year of depreciation. That's how they came up with the number. But the board, when they review it, can come up with, whatever either we suggest or what they come up with, it being an average of 3 years depreciation or whatever.
Which is kind of what I've thrown out there, the highest of the last 3 years depreciation.
I guess I want to throw maybe a little bit of a curveball. To me, the 1 year depreciation reference was, it's legacy wording. It's, where did we get that $2 million from? And the explanation is, at the time, it was 1 year's depreciation in 2017. Today, the depreciation, overall depreciation has been going down.
That's kind of the nature of depreciation, isn't it?
Well, particularly if you're not spending a lot on capital. But, yeah, as a static basis, yes, depreciation goes down. But as you invest more and more in yourself, your depreciation in total goes up, in theory. But we have not been spending capital like we would like to. I think it's going down because we just haven't had the funds to invest in ourselves. This is a topic for another day, but should today our target be 1 year depreciation, I would argue all day long, no, that's just the wrong target. But in 2017, it was either the right target or better than nothing. But that's just my opinion. But I would love to have a sit-down discussion about today, 2021, whatever the heck today is, that 1 year depreciation does not reflect what our emergency reserves should be. And that's just, like I said, that's just a topic for another day. What we need to say in the memo is another issue, because I think we tried to sort of finesse the topic of where did the $2 million come from. At the time, it was 1 year depreciation. Maybe that was a bad strategy, maybe it was a good strategy, I don't know. But at this point in time, unless we're willing to tackle the issue of what should our depreciation be, then I think we're just kind of stuck with the wording and how we want to manage it, I don't know. We could just strike that entirely and just say, in 2017, the target was $2 million, because as far as I can figure out, that's entirely true. But we have lived for 5 years with the wording being what it is.
For me, that's still accommodation based on where I'm used to those types of things being a percentage of the replacement cost.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at our capital budget today, what does public utilities need on an annual basis? It's not $2 million. It may be more like $4 million. That's sort of the ongoing demand for funds. Should that be a basis for future emergency reserves? You know, I don't know.
And I think that's gonna be a higher number, and we gotta have a little more recognition of the reality of what the budget is and what the budget can be at this point in time. And so I think if I were to go for replacement cost, it'd throw that number to a point that would just scare the heck out of everybody.
I think I about 100% agree with you. So the issue is, do we come up with a whole new target before adjusting this memo? Or do we just say, let's go forward with the memo, and then later take on the issue of what should our emergency
I don't
reserves
think
be?
Carl and I are saying a whole new target. What we're saying is
Right.
modification of the target to make it a little more,
I think that's
Okay.
correct, but I also think, though, we've been working on this for a bit,
Hmm?
and I'm not sure we can continue to kick this down the road. So I think we ought to present it to the board and staff as is, or with these few modifications. And I think also, I forgot to say this, I think we left the basis in there in case someone asked, well, how'd they come up with $2 million? Well, 5 years ago, whether right or wrong, they estimated it to be based on 1 year's of depreciation. Maybe I'm wrong, but if the board goes through to review it again, maybe they ask us, maybe they don't, but they can always, we change it to a different basis and study it at that time.
Well, I think it's, and I'm not trying to resolve anything for sure, but if and when we go to the board, and if we decide, let's go with the current wording, we can tag onto that. We recommend that the board consider resetting the target.
There you go.
And this is me, and the Finance and Planning Committee will be glad to tackle that issue. You know, I mean, that's, one way is fix it and fix it now, which is, I think, what you're saying. Because that would be in line with your I'm hard-headed speech. And I think what I hear Larry saying is,
Well, it kind of already says that.
Yeah.
In number 4, it already says if we change this to annually, it'll be the board of directors annually will review the targets looking forward 3 to 5 years. The board can change the minimum targets. So,
but we're making a specific recommendation. The specific recommendation
no,
is,
my point is, you were saying, let's send the memo over and recommend they review the targets. Well, the policy already tells them to review the targets.
it's probably, yeah, okay, well, I was thinking
I
of
agree with you.
something a
The
little
policy
bit
tells them to
different.
review the target, and if they want to change the target, then more power to them.
Yeah.
But in order to probably change the target, they're gonna have to think about it, and they're gonna have to, there's lots of ways to do that, and there's gonna have to be some analysis done, and some calculations done, and, okay, so we at least have a starting point by which we can begin that discussion.
but if
What
we
I'm-
allow them
what
to
I'm
change the
hearing-
minimum, there's gonna be days when they're gonna say the minimum should be 0.
What's that?
I kind of agree with Becky on that too, that if you leave it, I think there are better, no offense to the board, but there are better financial minds within this body, not mine, but yours, than others. And I think there should be a mandatory minimum target based on whatever is decided by the best financial minds in the village, rather than leaving it to board discussion annually, because I do agree
There
with
will
Becky.
be years when they would
There-
look at changing it to minimum,
Yes,
0.
that
I
will
mean,
become the
can't-
default.
Don't they always have the discretion to do that, no matter what we say in this policy?
As a
Yeah, but we
policy.
want to make it hard for them, they
Yeah,
have to change the
I get
policy.
that, I get that.
And I don't think that's hard-headed. To me, it's commonsensical.
Well, we already state this is the minimum amounts.
But then you tell them they can change the minimum amount.
Well, I'm
And they
saying.
can, but I want them to have to really work and change the whole policy if they're gonna go down to
Yeah.
decrease the minimum.
I mean, just speaking for myself, but I think I'm hearing Becky say this. My recommendation isn't the board review the minimum. My recommendation is the minimum should be
Increase.
higher.
To increase the minimum.
Yeah, that's me.
You could change, yeah, you just change number 4 here and say that annually they can review increasing the targeted minimum.
Yes.
Well, but
I like that.
I'm saying the Finance and Planning Committee, when presenting the memo, says, you should do this, or you have to do this, but we're not saying you should review it, we're saying you should increase it.
We're presenting them with a policy, and in the policy, we tell them you should increase it.
No. I don't know that that's what you want to say in the policy.
Well, yeah, you gotta watch,
I'm saying stapled to the policy is, oh, by the way, at least one person on the committee says, that number's too low.
maybe review it to determine if the minimum should be increased.
I'm saying the minimum should be increased.
We're just telling them you gotta review it every year to see if it should be increased.
Well, but if you just say, you should review it, and they don't have a point of view, there's a pretty good chance they're just gonna say, that's good enough. I mean, I want to provide clear input. I'm just telling them that 1 year depreciation is too low, $2 million is
Well, just change it to this, then, say, at least annually, the board of directors, with input from the Finance and Planning Committee and the general manager, will review and set increases to the emergency reserve funds, targets looking 3 to 5 years out.
I've been on too many committees that have been wiped out. That's,
I
Well,
like it.
but
yeah,
I hear what you're saying, but if
Okay.
if the boards continue to do the actions like that, they're gonna continue to get voted out and all that kind of stuff, so, I mean,
Okay.
to some degree, you gotta,
Okay. We have to move forward, that's all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
hard-nosed because I've sat on the board and had to address this thing, similar issues for 12 years. I've sat on finance committees, funding committees, and I've seen how people act. And I want to protect the association. I want to protect us. And give them directions on how to do it.
Okay, Carl, is that clear enough?
Yeah.
You got all that, Carl?
Yeah, you got all that?
That sounds there. I think that's what you said.
Okay. I mean, I think you have, shall we say, enough input for this next draft?
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
maybe I change input to advice.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna just ask Carl and Becky one question, which is, at this time, do you wanna talk about the working capital fund policy, yes or no, et cetera? Have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, first, I personally need some clarification. Let me grab the notes. Okay. So I've heard a couple of different accounts for the purpose of this. For now, I'll call it working capital funds. One was that it was requested by a prior GM to more or less create kind of a balance of what's left to spend for capital reserves. or for capital expenditures. But I'm also hearing no, it should be more a reserve for future capital expenses. It's two different things in my mind. So I need clarification, I would like clarification on what the intent is. I'm, relatively new, so I'm not familiar with how all this came about.
So I'll give you my understanding of it in talking with Karina and the group, which was under our current structure, all right? If we want to pave a section of streets in the village, we wait until we've collected enough assessments, which puts us to August. And then we say, ooh, we need to cut a contract because now we have cash to cut the contract. And by that time, it's too late and we can't get around to it, so it gets deferred because we're a cash flow organization, right? We don't just do it and then we'll pay you as we get paid type of thing. So the idea was, instead of constantly taking every capital project and every major project, and basically, we have the idea and it takes us nearly 2 years to execute it because we can't, by the time we build up the cash, it's winter time, we can't execute it, we have to wait till spring. Everything takes twice as long as it should take. Instead, we want to have these working capital funds where I have a pot of cash, okay, that we save up, and once we get them saved up, we'll constantly have to replenish them, but we're replenishing them on the backside, right? So you have the cash to cut the contract with the contractor. I can start in the spring, okay? And then I pay that forward and I suck the cash out from the assessments and stuff and put it back in there. So for the next project, I'm always ahead, right? So instead of carrying over, which is what Gary just got mad about, and I agree with him, carrying over money because we couldn't spend it. Well, why couldn't we spend it? Because we were working on this backwards working capital problem, okay? And we end up carrying money over into the next year, which we really intended to spend back here, but we didn't get it all collected fast enough to be able to actually cut the contract. So now we carry this big pot of money forward into the next year, which confuses villagers writ large. What do you mean we had $2 million at the end of the year? Oh, it's profit, and they're all confused. And in reality, we were $2 million behind. Right, because we didn't spend the money. So the idea was, we had some money, primarily from the money we set aside in case we had to pay back PPP. We set aside some money, so let's, reinvest in ourselves this time, put it into a working capital fund. So now we have cash up front, where we can be more proactive and execute programs and execute on things when they're the right timing, so we're not piling everything at the end of the year when we can't get all the contractors and all that kind of stuff, and then pay ourselves back so that these working capital funds are truly money in, money out, money in, money out, money in, money out. But we've created a fund by which to do that, and trying to break the cycle we're currently in is how Karina and others are describing it, because literally she's constantly being battered by the department heads and stuff saying, hey, I need to cut this contract. Yeah, but we don't have the money yet, right? And so that's what they're trying to break. That's my understanding of it. It makes total logical sense, and having watched a number of projects fail to execute in the year that they were supposed to execute, and when you do the forensics on them, you realize, yeah, that was not very good business. And we tend to also create bad blood with our contractors, okay? And therefore, now we're really hesitant to even go to our contractors even initially to ask them for a bid, because we don't even know if we'll have the money this year. And it's created just this very negative spiraling effect of how to efficiently execute the resources that we have against the projects we need to get done. So that's my understanding of what this is all about. And the idea was, but we need rules. We need guidance from the board, and then rules within the staff on how that will be done,
Funded.
okay, funded, which line items in the budget are gonna be, utilize this, which ones are not, et cetera, you know, how is that identified in the budgeting process, et cetera, so that there's clarity on how the money will be spent, and clarity how the money will then be repopulated.
Well said.
And I'm
I
gonna
hope
jump
it's
on it.
recorded.
Yeah. I'm gonna jump on exactly what you said. I said I was hard-nosed about the other fund. I'm anal about this one. And have been since 2004 with the other corporation that I was with. To the point, I hate to say it, but when I recognized what was going on here in the village and what was not going on here in the village, it scared the bejeebers, find the right nice word, the bejeebers on me, to the point that I actually sold and got out of the village. It is that imperative for the financial stability and the financial future of the village to have something like this.
Yeah.
And I can sit down with you and get on my big soapbox or whatever, but I've lived this for how many years, since 2004, like I said, both on the board, on the finance committee, on funding committees, and had the privilege of being in an organization that recognized this. Now, it took a lot of work. I won't say it was easy. And it took a lot of work, and they still are working on it daily to do this. And daily to explain to some of the members, smaller organization, why are you sitting on $5 million? It is because here is the plan. Here is the funding that's required. Here's how much you have to put into it every year to do that. To the point that I kind of got really proud of them. I'm going to say that here. It became the culture, not only of the management, but it became the culture of the membership. But it took a lot of work, but they recognize it is so essential. You cannot have a sound future if you don't do this kind of thing. And so with that, I'll get off my soapbox, but I can't tell you how important I believe that is.
I think it is taproot deep to any organization, business or like
Even
we
my
are,
home.
that we have the ability to do what needs to be done without having to just wish for it, because that's what they've been doing. It's almost back in the early 70s, I met a young man managing a business, and he said, we're switching from the cigar box method of running the business to something a little more modern. And that's what a lot of people are thinking right now.
So it's, to me, it's kind of like a hybrid reserve. Because I think of reserves like absent, with a reserve, a reserve study, that they're gonna say, okay, for the next 50 years, you're gonna have all these kind of expenses, so you create a plan to do that. But this seems to be a little bit different than that. Or when we're talking about it and setting it, was that just very high-level thoughts? Were there any thoughts of what the basis was or anything like that?
So that's another part, and we've talked about it in this committee before, is, we have strategic plans for water and sewer and stuff like that. We're improving on the streets department's strategic plan. So we have the plans about how you, over the long haul, maintain our infrastructure, right? We have, we still need to invest in updating those plans, right? So there's a degree of doing that. But that's the basis then by which you would then turn and say, okay, based on that, I need to do 30 miles of road work, and of that, 10 miles is gonna be paving. I'm gonna have to cut a contract next year for 10 miles of paving. Okay, I shouldn't be, I should be able to target some of the money in the working capital fund to help me set that contract in motion so we can pave the 10 miles of road, realizing that as we collect our revenues, we'll pay that fund back, and then we'll use that the next year. Same thing for the utility departments, et cetera. So I think the strategic plans in some areas are good. We need to improve upon some areas to get them even better, and then now you have the plan by which you're gonna target this money.
At a smaller organization, just for reference, we engaged an engineering firm and went through all the assets, the cost, the replacement cost. Here,
In their life. Because it's not just cost and the life, how long are they gonna last?
right, exactly. And our reserve policy was based on that study. Here, we're spread out. That would really not be logical. But we utilized other ways of knowing what's coming down the road, the best of our ability. For example, we know we're gonna have to invest in a new water storage facility because our use is increasing. In order to keep up the usable pressure, we're gonna have to add another storage facility. We know that's coming. We know approximately what it is today. So I think Jeff said it very well.
But Gary, there's actually two things going on there. One is replacement of what you've got. And that's where you get into the type of fund that you and I are talking about. The other is a strategic planning type of a fund. And so you can get yourself into lots of different kinds of funds, but your replacement fund is not what's going to, by additional, it will just take care of what's there.
Yeah, I'm probably using the word, well, I didn't use the word
I
replacement.
think we're kind of blending things together, and that's good. That's what you get with this kind of discussion, is you get to bounce back and forth.
Well, I think that's why they created a working, capital fund into two categories, right? For capital expenditure and operating. So, some things we're replacing things or upgrading them, and some things we're just keeping, wheels on the road.
Maintenance,
Maintenance.
day-to-day maintenance.
Yeah. Does that help or not?
Yeah, I would struggle with.
I personally think we should stay away from the term reserve,
Yeah,
okay? Because I think it confuses the general populace that,
Sure.
remember, we are representing them, to some degree, as we're supposed to think of how they think. So I would not use a reserve, because reserve is a separate policy. I think we should say something, stick with working capital and then try and use, the term to go
We
with
use the word
that.
replacement.
So,
Okay.
Isn't it just called a working capital
I
fund?
would call it working capital fund.
Yeah.
But I'd like to be more definitive, working capital fund for replacement.
Yeah, I mean,
It could be.
the
Because I
specifics
think you
behind
need,
what
I
exactly
think you
what
need a
goes all
working
in there.
capital fund for new stuff and a working capital fund for replacement stuff.
But we do have that, isn't there a public utility or public works reserve and then a working capital fund for each?
There's a working capital.
No, we have an emergency
600,
reserve.
like 666,000 for the utility. And it just says general capital, which is about 1.3.
Yeah.
That's 666, as far as I know, has never been established. Gary could clarify this, but in his June memo, I looked for it. I did not see a recommendation to fund that reserve. I don't know, things may have happened since then. But when I looked at the first paragraph that said recommendation, I did not see the establishment of a public utilities working capital. It was definitely a general capital $2.5 million deposit.
Well,
Well, the issue is, I am 100% confident by the end of the year that there will be an attempt to fund the utility working capital. Where we are exactly today, that's my interpretation of your memo.
today it's called public utility reserves.
That's the emergency reserve.
Well,
Well, not today.
No.
The
No.
old, check.
Well, right, not today.
One
but
Article 10.
The intent of that is to call that emergency reserve if we,
yeah, we're working on that now,
Right,
but
right, correct.
but published on July 31st is public utility reserves.
correct.
Your
And
memo.
then that's
your-
like $1.8 million.
Your memo calls it capital restricted funds, public utilities, 667. Capital restricted funds, general, 1.5 million.
Yeah, 1.597, right?
But this just shows 1.5 even.
Oh,
Okay. As my role as committee chair, we have to be out of here at 3 o'clock.
Yep.
It is 2:45. We have not gotten to budget guidance. It sounds to me like our discussion on the reserve policy is quite wrapped up.
This replaces this.
that's what's there.
I think the reserve policy is wrapped up, we just need to have Carl send out the final version.
Oh,
We all
right.
give it a yay-hoo and it's done.
Well, the question is, do we need to continue to talk about the working capital fund policy?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's where I'm at.
Working capital funds, no reserve in there.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, this is a throw-in. The golf reserve, that's a reserve.
You mean the golf surcharge?
The golf surcharge, it's called golf reserves on the balance sheet.
Yeah.
Yes.
The one that's being funded by surcharges, that is a reserve. One of these days it'll become working capital. and
For the
when we get-
Balboa Golf Course.
For Balboa Golf Course, once we get a plan, and then we start actually, using the money. But that's the distinction between working capital and reserve. So we do have another reserve fund. There's no policy statement around it. With that, we have another meeting scheduled for Wednesday. I hope people have put it on their calendars, because I would plan to continue this discussion on Wednesday. Is that okay with everybody, or is that like a total shock? Wednesday, yes, Wednesday, no.
I won't be able to make Wednesday.
Okay. Anybody else?
I can, for what it's worth.
Okay, I mean, it's nice to have a quorum. Okay, so unless I hear anything else, we will meet Wednesday, 1 o'clock, this room, continue the discussion on working capital, and then hopefully address budget guidance. There's no budget issues that I can think of. My goal is to get the final fees memo out quickly as possible. We hope to get something from Karina about the next budget review. You're gonna try to get out the next version of the reserve memo.
But we still have information we have to get from Karina on the emergency.
Yeah. This will be still
Okay.
subject to,
Subject to.
So in other words,
Her review.
depending upon, there may or may not be a next version of the.
hopefully, anything after that is just whatever Karina comes back with.
Okay,
And
Okay, very
change it accordingly.
And for budget guidance, weren't we supposed to get the board's goals defined? Or have we
that would
done
be
that and I missed
nice.
it?
We can bring Karina up for that one more time. And if you could note that, I guess that's, I will ring her up on that, but you can please put it in the minutes. Good catch. Appreciate it. Do the normal final thing. I'll start with the not yet approved committee member. Any general comments? Hate it, love it, miss this,
I think it's been a very interesting conversation today,
okay?
productive.
Gary? Thumbs up?
I'll do my best. Minutes.
And yeah, getting minutes out for next
Wednesday.
Wednesday, I
My
think we may
husband's
cut
having
this
no
slack.
surgery. Hopefully my friends are out of the hospital.
But we are also scheduled for next Monday and next Wednesday, and we expect next Wednesday to be what I would call the Big Bang, where the universe is formed. Okay?
I won't be at either one of those.
Next week?
No, I'm on a work trip.
Okay.
I won't be at next Wednesday. My mother fell and broke her hip, and so that's kind of serious. It's her hip and her femur, so we're kind of dealing with that out of state.
Okay.
The only thing I have to add for Wednesday is we want to continue this working fund policy.
Yeah.
Is to, especially for you guys with the history, is to be prepared to talk about the specific use of funds and where it's going to come from, timing, that kind of stuff. Because it, coming in on the very middle of this,
You're talking about the working capital?
the working
Working
capital
capital.
fund.
We've never done it before. We got one June memo that probably arguably should have occurred in.
You got what now, one?
The only time that, at the board level, that we've ever talked about working capital at the board level was, well, it was part of the budget in October of last year, and then Gary's memo in June. And that's the only time I'm aware. I mean, it's a really, really, really good question, but there's not a whole lot of history. But we can talk about that
Yeah.
next Wednesday. I mean, that's.
Regardless,
Yeah,
you guys that have a little bit more knowledge about it.
Sure.
Well, and just as my recollection, isn't it kind of an offshoot of, they used to have the rollover funds that they said were there, but they never really funded it. This was just, but they didn't spend it this year, so we'll carry it over. But the funds were never there. And then the next year, it's like, well, we were supposed to have that. Well, we didn't, because we didn't have the money. So Charles King, I believe, had them set up not a reserve, but just a separate balance sheet account for those. So at least it was money accounted for. That's my recollection of kind of the initiation of it, for what it's worth.
Okay.
Okay.
May or may not help.
So, with that, I guess in the interest of letting the Recreation Committee have this room on, I look for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Meeting so adjourned. Thank you, guys.